Clearwater, Virginia. On an ordinary morning, a 90-year-old woman rolled into the gas station. No one in town knew she'd survived the jungles of Vietnam, saving hundreds as a combat medic. But today, the Iron Fangs biker gang picked the wrong target. They thought age meant weakness. They tried intimidation. What they didn't realize, Dorian Highfield is a veteran, and veterans don't back down. When these bikers crossed the line, Dorian made a single phone call. That's when everything changed. The next hours would turn this peaceful town into a battleground, one that would never forget her name. You're watching Veteran Biker. If you respect courage, smash that like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because here we tell stories that don't just inspire, they remind us what real strength looks like. Let's get into it. The morning sun cast a gentle glow over the quiet streets of Clearwater, Virginia. The town stirred with the soft rhythm of early risers, shopkeepers unlocking their doors, children on bicycles, and the occasional hum of a passing car. At the edge of town, a small gas station stood as a familiar landmark, its weathered sign creaking softly in the morning breeze. This was Mike's Gas and Go, a place that had served the community for decades, where friendly faces and warm greetings were as constant as the fuel pumps. Dorian Highfield guided her old Ford Taurus into the lot, her movements deliberate and steady. Her silver hair was pinned back neatly, and her posture was remarkably straight, a telltale sign of a life built on discipline and purpose. She pulled up to her usual spot by the pump, stepping out with care but with an air of quiet strength that often went unnoticed by those who didn't know her. "Good morning, Mrs. Highfield," called Astria Windvale, the station's young attendant. Her voice was bright, and her genuine smile was a fixture at the station. Astria had known Dorian for years, admiring the elderly woman's independence and grace. "Good morning, Astria," Dorian replied, her tone warm but measured, just the usual today, a full tank. Astria nodded and quickly set to work, while Dorian moved to stretch her legs. The scent of gasoline mingled with the fresh morning air as Dorian glanced around, her gaze sweeping across the familiar sights of her town. It was a peaceful morning, the kind she had come to cherish in her later years. But beneath her calm demeanor lay a history few in Clearwater knew, a history of battles fought, lives saved, and strength forged in the unrelenting crucible of war. Her thoughts drifted as she waited, and a faint smile touched her lips. Memories of her time as a combat medic in Vietnam surfaced unbidden. She could still hear the roar of helicopters slicing through the humid jungle air, feel the adrenaline as she worked to stabilize soldiers under fire, and see the faces of the men she had saved. Over 300 lives pulled back from the brink, each mission a testament to her resolve and unyielding courage. But that was another life, a chapter she had closed long ago. The sound of approaching motorcycles shattered the stillness, dragging Dorian back to the present. At first it was a distant rumble, but it grew louder, more menacing, until the roar of engines filled the small gas station. She turned slightly, catching the reflection of chrome and leather in her car window. Her expression didn't change, but her sharp eyes took in every detail with the precision of someone who had once been trained to assess threats in an instant. 15 motorcycles rolled into the lot, their riders clad in black leather jackets adorned with the emblem of a snarling wolf. This was the Iron Fangs, a gang that had recently begun to carve out a presence in Clearwater. Their leader, Keir Lowen, dismounted first, his tall frame exuding arrogance as he pulled off his helmet. His eyes, cold and calculating, scanned the station before settling on Dorian. "Well, what do we have here?" Keir's voice carried across the lot, a deliberate challenge laced with mockery. Snickers rippled through his gang as they dismounted, their boots crunching against the gravel. "Just getting gas," Dorian replied evenly, her tone giving away nothing. Keir sauntered closer, his leather vest bearing patches that hinted at a life built on violence and intimidation. He stopped a few feet away from Dorian, his posture deliberately threatening. "Looks like Grandma's out for a morning drive," he said, loud enough for his gang to laugh. Dorian remained calm, her hand steady on the pump as she finished filling her tank. She had faced worse, far worse, in her lifetime. The jungles of Vietnam had taught her that true danger rarely announced itself this boldly. She capped her tank and turned to face Keir, her gaze steady. "You're blocking the exit," she said plainly, nodding toward the line of motorcycles. Keir smirked, the kind of smirk that came with too much confidence and not enough sense. "And what are you going to do about it?" Astria, who had been watching nervously from behind the counter, stepped outside. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly. Keir turned to Astria, his smirk widening. "Relax, sweetheart. We're just saying hello to Grandma here." Dorian's eyes didn't leave Keir's, her gaze sharp and unwavering. "Leave the girl alone," she said, her voice calm but edged with steel. For a moment there was silence, the tension thick in the air. Then Keir chuckled, stepping back. "All right, Grandma," he said, holding up his hands in mock surrender. "We'll move. Wouldn't want to upset you." As the Iron Fangs began to move their motorcycles, Keir leaned closer to Dorian, his voice low. "You might want to remember this day, old lady. Not everyone in this town is as polite as us." Dorian didn't flinch. She simply watched as the gang rode off, the roar of their engines fading into the distance. Astria hurried over, her face pale. "Mrs. Highfield, are you all right?" Dorian nodded, a faint smile on her lips. "I'm fine, Astria, thank you." But as she got back into her car, her mind was already working. She knew this wasn't over. Dorian Highfield drove away from the gas station, her hands steady on the wheel, but her mind buzzed with thoughts. The encounter with the Iron Fangs had been a test, and while it seemed trivial on the surface, she knew men like Keir never let things rest. She had met his type before, brash, hungry for power, and willing to bully anyone weaker to prove their dominance. Her years in Vietnam had taught her that people like Keir only stopped when they were made to. The road back to her small house wound through the outskirts of Clearwater, where the fields stretched wide under the morning sun. The tranquility of the landscape contrasted sharply with her thoughts, which drifted unbidden to memories of the war. Vietnam was where Dorian had found her purpose. She had been barely 23 when she enlisted as a combat medic, driven by a desire to do something meaningful with her life. The training was grueling, but she had thrived under the pressure. The war, however, had been a different kind of test. Her mind replayed scenes that had stayed with her for decades. The cries of wounded soldiers calling for help as mortar fire rained down. The metallic smell of blood mixed with sweat and dirt. She remembered one night in particular, a mission deep behind enemy lines. A platoon had been ambushed, and she and a handful of medics had been sent in under the cover of darkness to extract the wounded. Dorian had moved through the chaos with calm precision, her hands never faltering as she stabilized one soldier after another. A young man named Victor Hollow had been among them, his leg shattered by shrapnel. She had dragged him through a hail of bullets to the waiting helicopter, her heart pounding but her resolve unshaken. The look of gratitude on his face as they lifted off had been worth every ounce of fear. Over the course of her service, Dorian had completed over 200 missions like that one, saving more than 300 lives. It wasn't the medals or commendations she cared about, though she had plenty of those. It was the knowledge that she had made a difference, that she had been there when it mattered most. As she pulled into her driveway, Dorian shook off the memories and focused on the present. She had no regrets about her service, but she had left that part of her life behind when she returned home. Clearwater had been her sanctuary, a place where she could live in peace. But now, with the Iron Fangs stirring trouble, she wondered how long that peace would last. true to her instincts, the Iron Fangs weren't done. Later that afternoon, as Dorian was tending to the roses in her front yard, she heard the distant rumble of motorcycles again. This time they didn't stop at the gas station. The group rode through the residential streets, their engines loud and deliberate, as if to send a message. Dorian straightened, brushing dirt from her hands, and watched as the bikers passed her house. Keir was at the front, his sharp eyes scanning the neighborhood. For a moment their gazes locked. He smirked and gave her a mocking wave before speeding off, his gang following close behind. It wasn't long before the phone calls started. Astria called first, her voice shaky. "Mrs. Highfield, they came back to the station. They didn't say much, but they were looking for you. What did they want?" Dorian asked, her voice calm despite the unease curling in her stomach. "They didn't say, just laughed and told me to tell you to stay in your lane." "What does that even mean?" Dorian thanked her and hung up, her mind racing. The next call came from her neighbor, Finian Shadowmire, who had seen the bikers riding in circles near the town square. "They're up to something, Dorian," he said, his voice laced with worry. "I don't like it." Dorian assured him she was fine, but she couldn't ignore the signs. The Iron Fangs were making their move, and it wasn't just about her, it was about Clearwater. This town was a perfect target for men like Keir, small, quiet, and unprepared for a threat like his gang. By evening, the tension in town was palpable. The sight of the Iron Fangs loitering in parking lots and revving their engines on street corners had unsettled everyone. Shopkeepers closed early, and parents hurried their children inside. Dorian stood at her window, watching the streetlights flicker on. The time for waiting was over. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she hadn't used in years. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Victor Hollow," the voice said, deep and steady. "Victor," Dorian said, her voice firm. "I need your help." There was a pause, then a low chuckle. "Dorian Highfield. I was wondering when I'd hear from you again. What's going on?" Dorian explained the situation briefly, and Victor's tone grew serious. "You're dealing with a gang like that alone?" he asked. "I'm not alone," Dorian replied. "Not anymore." Victor didn't hesitate. "I'll round up the guys. We'll be there by morning." Dorian hung up and exhaled slowly. The Iron Fangs had no idea what was coming. Dorian woke early the next morning, the quiet hum of Clearwater's streets still undisturbed. The phone call to Victor Hollow the previous night had been brief, but it was enough to set things into motion. She had trusted Victor with her life once before, and she trusted him now. If he said he would come, he would. The morning passed slowly, each moment heavy with anticipation. By midday, the low growl of engines reached her ears, but this time it wasn't the Iron Fangs. Dorian stepped onto her porch just as a line of motorcycles appeared on the horizon. The Vietnam Vets MC had arrived. At the head of the formation was Victor Hollow, his commanding presence unmistakable. His hair, now streaked with silver, was pulled back neatly, and his leather jacket bore the emblem of the Vets, a proud eagle clutching a banner with the words "United We Stand." Behind him rode Gideon Ashvale, whose massive frame made his bike look small, and Maylin Draycott, her sharp eyes scanning the surroundings with precision. Victor parked his bike in front of Dorian's house and dismounted, his movements deliberate and strong. "Dorian," he said, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth, "you look as sharp as ever." "And you're as punctual as always," Dorian replied, her voice warm but steady. The other members of the Vets began to gather, their presence a stark contrast to the chaos the Iron Fangs had brought. These were men and women who had known the price of war, who carried themselves with a quiet strength that spoke louder than any roar of an engine. Victor turned serious. "Tell me about these Iron Fangs. What are we dealing with?" Dorian quickly recounted her encounters with the gang, describing Keir Lowen and his penchant for intimidation. As she spoke, Victor's expression hardened, and the other Vets exchanged grim looks. "They're testing the waters," Malin said, her voice sharp. "Pushing boundaries to see how far they can go. They'll go as far as we let them," Gideon rumbled, crossing his arms over his chest. Victor nodded. "Then we won't let them go any further." He turned back to Dorian. "We'll make our presence known. They need to understand this town isn't theirs to take." The vets didn't waste time. They split into smaller groups, each one riding through different parts of Clearwater to show their presence. It wasn't long before word began to spread. There was a new biker gang in town, and they weren't here for trouble. They were here to stop it. By late afternoon, the Iron Fangs had noticed Keir Lowen sat at the town's main diner with several of his gang members when one of his scouts rushed in. "Boss, you're not gonna believe this," the man said out of breath. "There's another gang riding around town. They're not locals, but they're organized." Keir leaned back in his chair, his smirk replaced with a scowl. "Who the hell are they?" "Veteran types," the scout replied. "Leather jackets, eagles on their backs. They're not just riding, they're patrolling, almost like they're looking for us." Keir's scowl deepened. He hadn't expected resistance, certainly not from a group that carried itself with such confidence. "All right," Keir said, standing up and throwing a few bills on the table. "Let's go meet our new neighbors." The Iron Fangs mounted their bikes and roared into the streets, their engines screaming a challenge. It didn't take long for them to cross paths with the Vietnam Vets MC. The two groups met in Clearwater's town square, where a few onlookers quickly retreated to the safety of nearby buildings. Victor Hollow was already waiting, his arms resting casually on the handlebars of his bike. Gideon and Malin flanked him, their expressions unreadable but alert. Behind them, the rest of the vets formed a quiet but imposing line. Keir Lowen and the Iron Fangs skidded to a stop a few feet away. Keir dismounted, his smirk returning as he sauntered forward. "Well, well," Keir said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "What do we have here? The retirement club decided to take a field trip?" Victor didn't respond immediately. He simply studied Keir, his gaze steady and unflinching. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm but carried an unmistakable authority. "We're the Vietnam Vets MC," Victor said. "We're here to make sure this town stays safe." Keir laughed, but it was forced. "Safe from what? A bunch of loud bikes and a little fun? You've got the wrong idea, old man." Victor didn't rise to the bait. "We know exactly what you're about, Lowen. We're not here to play games. This is your one warning. Leave Clearwater alone." Keir's smirk faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered. "You think you can just show up and tell me what to do? This is my town now." Victor took a step forward, his calm demeanor never wavering. "It's not your town, Keir, and as long as we're here, it never will be." The tension in the square was palpable, the air thick with the unspoken promise of violence. For a moment, neither side moved, each waiting for the other to make the first move. Keir finally broke the silence with a short laugh. "All right, old man," he said, backing away. "We'll see how long you last." The Iron Fangs mounted their bikes and rode off, their engines echoing through the streets. Victor turned to his crew, his expression serious. "They're not going to back down," he said. "This was just the first round." As the rumble of the Iron Fangs' engines faded into the distance, the Vietnam Vets MC regrouped in the town square. The residents of Clearwater, who had been peeking cautiously from behind curtains and doorways, began to emerge. Their faces showed a mix of curiosity and relief, though the tension lingered in the air. Victor Hollow dismounted his bike, taking a moment to scan the square. He could feel the weight of the town's anxiety pressing down on him. People weren't used to this kind of confrontation, and it was clear that the Iron Fangs had already sown seeds of fear. Malin Draycott approached, her sharp eyes catching every movement around them. "They won't let this slide," she said quietly. "Keir Lowen isn't the type to back down, not without a fight." Victor nodded, his expression grim. "That's exactly what I'm counting on. They're cocky, but they're reckless." If we can outthink them, we can end this without putting the town in more danger. Dorian Highfield, who had been observing from the edge of the square, stepped forward. Her presence, though quiet, commanded attention. "They'll come back stronger," she said, her voice steady. "They want control, and they see resistance as a challenge. You'll need to be ready for whatever they throw at you." Victor turned to her, his respect for the woman evident in his demeanor. "What do you suggest, Dorian? You've faced men like this before." Dorian's gaze didn't waver. "They thrive on fear and chaos. Take that away, and you take away their power. You'll need to show the town that they're not invincible, and that Clearwater isn't theirs to terrorize." Malin tilted her head, considering Dorian's words. "We could start with a show of unity," she said. "Ride through the town, make sure people see us standing guard. If the Fangs try to intimidate anyone, we'll be there to stop it." Victor nodded. "Do it. Split into teams, cover as much ground as you can. Stay visible, but don't provoke them. Let them make the first move." The vets wasted no time. Over the next few hours, they patrolled the streets of Clearwater, their presence a reassuring sight for the townspeople. Residents who had been too afraid to speak out against the Iron Fangs began to come forward, sharing stories of harassment and threats. It became clear that the gang's grip on the town was more insidious than anyone had realized. Meanwhile, Keir Lowen was plotting his next move. Back at their hideout, a dilapidated warehouse on the outskirts of town, the Iron Fangs gathered around their leader. Keir paced the room, his frustration evident. "They think they can just ride in here and tell us what to do," he snarled. "Who do they think they are?" Luna Frostwood leaned against a stack of crates, her arms crossed. "Veterans by the look of them," she said, her tone dismissive. "A bunch of old-timers with nothing better to do." Amara Nightshade, seated in the corner, didn't say anything. Her eyes flickered with doubt, but she kept her thoughts to herself. She had seen the way the Vietnam vets carried themselves. Disciplined, united, and far more experienced than Keir seemed to realize. "They're just another gang," Keir continued, his voice rising. "We'll show them who runs this town." He looked around the room, his gaze settling on one of his men. "Blaze, take a couple of the guys and hit the square tonight. Make some noise. Let them know we're not scared of them." Blaze grinned, eager to prove himself. "You got it, boss." As night fell, the tension in Clearwater escalated. The Iron Fangs returned to the town square, revving their engines and shouting taunts. They didn't attack directly, but their presence was enough to unsettle the residents once again. The Vietnam Vets MC was ready. Victor and his team had positioned themselves strategically, watching from the shadows. When the Iron Fangs made their move, the vets were there to intercept. It wasn't a physical confrontation, yet the two groups faced off in the square, their bikes forming opposing lines. The air was thick with unspoken challenges, each side waiting for the other to strike. Keir Lowen stepped forward, his smirk firmly in place. "You just don't know when to quit, do you?" he called to Victor. Victor remained calm, his voice steady. "We're not going anywhere, Lowen. The sooner you accept that, the better it'll be for everyone." Keir's smirk turned into a scowl. "You think you can stop us? You're outnumbered and outgunned." Victor didn't flinch. "We've faced worse than you. If you want to test us, go ahead. But let me warn you, you won't like how it ends." The tension was almost unbearable, but after a moment, Keir signaled for his gang to back off. "This isn't over," he said, his voice dripping with venom. As the Iron Fangs rode away, Victor turned to his team. "They'll come back," he said, "and next time they won't hold back." As the Iron Fangs disappeared into the night, the Vietnam Vets MC gathered at Dorian Highfield's house to regroup. The air was tense but purposeful, their years of experience in the military driving them to action. Dorian stood at the head of the table in her modest kitchen, her eyes sharp and focused. Victor Hollow leaned against the counter, his arms crossed, while Malin Draycott scribbled notes on a map of Clearwater spread across the table. Gideon Ashvale sat silently, his massive frame exuding a quiet strength as he watched and listened. "We don't have the numbers to fight them head-on," Victor began, his voice steady but firm. "Keir Lowen will escalate this, and when he does, we need to be ready." Dorian nodded. "The key is to control the battlefield. This town isn't just our home, it's our advantage. We know it better than they do." Malin pointed to several locations on the map. "We should set up patrols here, here, and here," she said, tapping her pen on the gas station, the town square, and the diner. "These are the places they've targeted so far. If we maintain a presence, we can intercept them before they cause any real damage." Victor glanced at Gideon. "You and I will handle the gas station. Malin, you take the diner. We'll leave a few of the guys to cover the square. We need to stay visible but mobile. Keep them guessing." "And the townspeople?" Dorian asked. "They're scared," Victor admitted, "but if they see us out there standing up to the fangs, it might give them the courage to fight back in their own way." Dorian's gaze hardened. "Good. Fear is what Keir thrives on. We take that away, and he loses his power." The room fell silent for a moment as the weight of the situation settled over them. They weren't just defending themselves, they were defending an entire community that had come to depend on them in just a few short days. "We'll start tonight," Victor said, breaking the silence. "Everyone knows their positions. Stay sharp and stay safe." The group dispersed, each member of the vets moving with the practiced efficiency of soldiers heading into battle. Dorian watched them go, a sense of pride swelling in her chest. These weren't just bikers, they were heroes, each one willing to put their lives on the line for a town that wasn't even their own. As the vets took up their positions, the Iron Fangs were already planning their next move. Keir Lowen paced the floor of their hideout, his frustration evident in the sharp movements of his hands. "They think they can just stroll into my town and tell me what to do," he growled. "We'll see how brave they are when they're outnumbered and outmatched." Luna Frostwood leaned against a wall, twirling a knife in her fingers. "What's the plan, boss? You want us to hit them where it hurts?" Keir smirked, his anger turning into a dangerous determination. "Exactly. If they want to play heroes, let's give them something to cry about." He turned to Blaze, who was leaning casually against a stack of crates. "You and a few of the guys are going to the gas station. Break something, make some noise. Let them know we're not backing down." Blaze grinned, eager for action. "You got it." Keir's eyes shifted to Luna. "You take the diner. Smash a few windows, scare the staff. We don't need to burn the place down yet, just send a message." "And what about me?" Amara Nightshade asked quietly from her corner of the room. Keir hesitated for a moment, studying her. "You're coming with me. We're going to pay a little visit to the square. Time to show these vets what they're dealing with." The Iron Fangs split into their groups, each one heading toward a different part of Clearwater under the cover of darkness. At the gas station, Victor and Gideon were already on high alert. They had stationed themselves near the pumps, their bikes parked strategically to block the entrance. When they saw the headlights approaching, they exchanged a glance and prepared for the inevitable. Blaze and his crew roared into the lot, their engines drowning out the quiet hum of the night. Without a word, they began circling the pumps, their movements predatory. Victor stepped forward, his stance calm but commanding. "That's far enough," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. Blaze grinned, his eyes glinting with mischief. "Relax, old man. We're just here for a fill-up." Gideon moved to stand beside Victor, his sheer size making an intimidating statement. "The pumps are closed for the night," he rumbled. "Move along." Blaze's grin faltered, but he didn't back down. Instead, he revved his engine. the noise echoing through the lot like a challenge. Meanwhile, at the diner, Malin Draycott and a small group of vets watched from the shadows as Luna Frostwood and her crew approached. The gang wasted no time, smashing windows and shouting threats into the quiet night. Malin stepped forward, her voice sharp and unwavering. "That's enough!" Luna turned, her expression defiant. "And who's going to stop me? You—" Malin didn't flinch. "Leave now and we'll pretend this didn't happen. Stay and you'll regret it." For a moment it seemed like Luna might press the issue, but something in Malin's eyes made her hesitate. With a sneer, she motioned for her crew to retreat. "This isn't over," she said, her voice dripping with venom. Back at the town square, Keir and Amara found themselves face to face with Dorian and another group of vets. The air between them crackled with tension, each side waiting for the other to make a move. Keir smirked, his confidence unshaken. "You really think you can protect this whole town? You're outnumbered, outmatched, and out of your league." Dorian met his gaze, her voice calm but resolute. "I've faced worse than you, Lowen. If you think you can scare me, you're wasting your time." Keir's smirk twisted into a scowl. "We'll see about that." Keir Lowen's scowl deepened as he stared down Dorian Highfield and the Vietnam Vets MC in Clearwater's town square. Behind him, Amara Nightshade shifted uncomfortably, her loyalty to Keir wavering as she took in the calm resolve of the vets. These weren't just ordinary bikers. They were disciplined, confident, and clearly unafraid of the Iron Fangs. "Let's go, Keir," Amara said quietly, her voice barely audible over the distant hum of motorcycles. Keir turned sharply toward her, his expression a mix of anger and disbelief. "What did you say?" Amara held his gaze for a moment, then glanced at Dorian. Something about the elderly woman's presence made her hesitate. "You've made your point," Amara said carefully. "Pushing it further doesn't make sense right now." Keir didn't reply immediately, his fists clenching as he struggled to maintain control. Finally, he spat on the ground and turned back to Dorian. "This isn't over," he growled, motioning for his gang to follow him. The Iron Fangs retreated, their bikes roaring as they sped out of the square. The tension lingered even after they were gone, but Dorian and Victor Hollow exchanged a glance that spoke of shared determination. "They're testing us," Victor said quietly. "And they'll keep testing," Dorian replied, "until they find a weakness or we show them they won't win." That night, the Vietnam Vets MC doubled their patrols, spreading out across Clearwater to ensure the town remained safe. Their presence was a comfort to the residents, many of whom had grown weary of the Iron Fang's reign of terror. Shopkeepers who had once closed early kept their doors open longer, and families began to venture outside again. But the Iron Fangs weren't finished. Keir, humiliated by the vets' resilience, was determined to regain control. Over the next few days, his gang launched a series of calculated strikes designed to disrupt the town and intimidate the vets. At the gas station, Blaze returned with 2 other gang members in tow. They smashed a pump with a crowbar before speeding off into the night, leaving Victor and Gideon to assess the damage. "That's the second time they've hit this place," Gideon said, his voice a low rumble. "They're trying to draw us out." Victor nodded, his expression grim. "They're hoping we'll overreact. We can't give them the satisfaction." At the diner, Luna Frostwood led her crew in another round of vandalism, throwing rocks through the windows and spray-painting graffiti on the walls. This time, Malin Draycott was waiting for them. "Get out," Malin said firmly, stepping into their path. Luna sneered but didn't engage. She seemed to sense that the vets weren't just standing guard, they were strategizing, always one step ahead. Elsewhere, Keir himself targeted the town's hardware store, setting fire to a storage shed in the back lot. The flames were quickly extinguished, thanks to the quick response of the vets and the local fire department, but the message was clear. The Iron Fangs weren't backing down. Despite the escalating attacks, the Vietnam Vets MC remained resolute. Each act of retaliation from the Fangs was met with calm, coordinated action. They focused on protecting the town and minimizing damage, refusing to stoop to the gang's level of reckless aggression. For Dorian, it was a delicate balance. She understood the need for restraint, but she also knew that the Fangs needed to be stopped before their actions spiraled out of control. Late one evening, she sat with Victor, Malin, and Gideon at her kitchen table, a map of Clearwater spread out before them. "They're ramping up," Malin said, tracing the locations of the recent attacks. "It's only a matter of time before they go after something bigger." Victor nodded. "We need to hit them where it hurts. Show them we're not just playing defense." Dorian studied the map, her mind racing. "Keir thrives on control," she said thoughtfully. "If we take that away, we take away his power. But we'll need to be smart about it." The group began to plan their next move, their resolve strengthened by the trust they shared. The Iron Fangs had underestimated the Vietnam vets MC, and now Clearwater was becoming a battleground where discipline and strategy would face off against chaos and intimidation. The tension in Clearwater reached a breaking point when Keir Lowen and the Iron Fangs decided to escalate their campaign of terror. Their latest plan was bold and reckless, a direct confrontation at Clearwater's old mill, a sprawling industrial site on the edge of town. The mill, once a cornerstone of the town's economy, had been abandoned for years. Its shadowy corridors and rusting machinery provided the perfect stage for a showdown. The Vietnam vets MC, always vigilant, got wind of the Fangs' plans through their network of informants within the town. Victor Hollow, Dorian Highfield, and their team gathered late one evening to discuss their strategy. "They're planning something big," Malin Draycott said, spreading out a new map of the mill. "If they're heading there, it's not just to scare people, they're looking to make a statement." Victor nodded, his jaw set. "We can't let them take control of that site. It's too close to the residential area. If this gets out of hand, innocent people could get caught in the crossfire." Dorian, who had been quietly studying the map, finally spoke. "They're expecting us to react emotionally, to charge in and meet them head on. But if we're smart, we can turn this into an advantage." Malin grinned. "A trap, then?" Dorian nodded. "We use the mill's layout against them, divide them, isolate their leader, and make it clear that Clearwater is no place for their kind of chaos." The plan came together quickly. Gideon Ashvale and a small team would block off the main entrance, ensuring that no reinforcements could join the Fangs once the confrontation began. Malin and another group would take up positions inside the mill, ready to ambush from the shadows. Dorian and Victor would lead the main force, confronting Keir directly and drawing his attention away from the others. As night fell, the vets moved into position. The mill loomed like a sleeping giant, its broken windows and rusting metal casting eerie shadows under the moonlight. The air was heavy with anticipation, every sound magnified in the stillness. The Iron Fangs arrived shortly after midnight, their motorcycles slicing through the quiet like thunder. Keir Lowen led the way, his face twisted into a smirk of confidence. Behind him, Luna Frostwood and Blaze followed closely, their bikes roaring in defiance. Amara Nightshade rode at the back of the pack, her expression unreadable. Keir dismounted near the mill's main entrance, taking a moment to survey the scene. "Spread out," he ordered, his voice cutting through the night. "Make sure no one's hiding in the shadows. This is our town now, and it's time we made that clear." The Fangs began to fan out, their heavy boots crunching against the gravel. But they hadn't gone far before Gideon Ashvale and his team emerged from their hiding spots, blocking the entrance with their motorcycles. "That's far enough," Gideon said, his deep voice echoing in the stillness. Keir turned slowly, his smirk fading as he took in the sight of the Vietnam vets, MC. Victor and Dorian stepped forward, their calm presence a stark contrast to the chaos brewing in the Fangs' ranks. "You don't learn, do you?" Keir said, his voice laced with irritation. "This town isn't big enough for both of us." Victor remained steady, his voice firm. "We're not here to fight, Keir. We're here to end this. You've pushed Clearwater too far, and it's time for you to leave." Keir laughed, but it was a cold, humorless sound. "You think a bunch of old-timers can stop us? We're not going anywhere." As he spoke, Malin's team began to move through the mill's interior, positioning themselves to cut off any escape routes. Dorian watched Keir closely, her sharp eyes picking up on the subtle shifts in his demeanor. He was angry, yes, but there was also a hint of desperation. "Clearwater doesn't belong to you," Dorian said, her voice calm but cutting. "You're just a bully, Keir. And bullies don't last long when people stand up to them." The words hit their mark. Keir's smirk twisted into a snarl, and he stepped closer to Dorian. "You think you scare me, old lady? You're nothing but a relic." Dorian didn't flinch. "And you're nothing but noise." The tension snapped like a taut wire. Keir lunged forward, but Victor intercepted him, his movements swift and practiced. The two clashed in a flurry of blows, their fight spilling into the mill's open yard. At the same time, Luna Frostwood and Blaze attempted to flank the vets, but Malin's team sprang into action. The sound of fists meeting flesh echoed through the mill as the ambush unfolded, the vets using their training and teamwork to outmaneuver the Fangs. Amara Nightshade hung back, her hesitation growing with every passing second. She watched as her comrades were systematically taken down, the vets' superior tactics and discipline turning the tide of the battle. "Amara!" Keir shouted, his voice filled with rage. "Get over here and fight!" But Amara didn't move. Instead, she took a step back, her internal conflict written plainly on her face. The chaotic sounds of the confrontation filled the night air, the thud of boots on gravel, the sharp clash of fists, and the muffled shouts of commands being exchanged. The Vietnam vets MC fought with precision and unity, their every move a calculated effort to outmatch the Iron Fang's brute force. Victor Hollow wrestled with Keir Lowen in the center of the yard. Keir's aggression was wild and uncoordinated, his blows landing hard but without strategy. Victor, on the other hand, moved with the practiced ease of someone who had been in far worse situations. Each block, counter, and strike was deliberate, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to Keir's unbridled fury. "You're out of your depth, Lowen," Victor said through gritted teeth as he twisted Keir's arm and shoved him backward. "This isn't just about strength, it's about discipline, something you clearly don't understand." Keir snarled, staggering but refusing to back down. His ego, bruised by Victor's words and the situation spiraling out of his control, pushed him to lash out with renewed desperation. Nearby, Dorian Highfield moved with a grace that belied her years. Though she wasn't in the thick of the physical fight, her presence was commanding. She barked orders to the vets, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Malin, secure the east corridor. Gideon, block the rear exit. Don't let any of them escape." Her sharp eyes scanned the battlefield, taking in every detail. She spotted Blaze attempting to circle around to reinforce Keir, his intentions clear. "Victor, on your six!" Dorian called out. Victor spun just in time, catching Blaze mid-swing and delivering a swift elbow to the man's jaw. Blaze crumpled, groaning, as Victor stepped over him to re-engage Keir. Inside the mill, Malin Draycott's team executed their ambush with military precision. Luna Frostwood, though agile and fierce, found herself cornered by two of the vets. She lashed out, her movements sharp and desperate, but Malin was there to cut her off. "You're outnumbered," Malin said coldly, blocking Luna's escape route. "Give it up." Luna hesitated, her gaze darting between the vets and the open path behind them. With a frustrated growl, she raised her hands in mock surrender. "Fine. You've made your point." But not everyone in the Iron Fangs was as defiant. Amara Nightshade lingered near the edge of the yard, her internal struggle evident. She watched Keir's descent into chaos, his reckless decisions jeopardizing everyone under his command. She had joined the Iron Fangs seeking camaraderie and purpose, but now she saw only destruction and selfishness. When Keir shouted for her again, his voice a mix of desperation and fury, Amara made her decision. Instead of running to his aid, she turned toward Dorian, her expression conflicted but resolute. Dorian met her gaze and nodded slightly, understanding the unspoken plea. "If you're ready to stop this," Dorian said, her tone firm but not unkind, "there's still time to make it right." Amara took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she stepped away from the fight. She approached Dorian cautiously, raising her voice to be heard over the commotion. "I didn't sign up for this," she said. "I'm done following him." Dorian's expression softened slightly. "Then help us end it." Amara nodded and turned back toward the battlefield. She scanned the scene, her sharp eyes quickly assessing the situation. Spotting Keir's increasing desperation, she moved decisively. Keir had Victor pinned momentarily, but before he could land another blow, Amara grabbed his arm and yanked him back. "That's enough, Keir!" she shouted. Keir spun to face her, his shock quickly morphing into rage. "What are you doing?" he demanded. "Stopping you from destroying everything," Amara replied, her voice steady. "You've lost, Keir. It's over." For a moment, Keir seemed frozen, unable to process the betrayal. Then he lunged at Amara, his anger blinding him. But before he could reach her, Victor stepped in, delivering a precise strike that sent Keir sprawling to the ground. The rest of the Iron Fangs, seeing their leader defeated and their ranks falling apart, began to retreat. The battle was over, the Vietnam Vets MC standing victorious. As the dust settled, Dorian approached Victor, her eyes scanning the yard. "It's done," she said softly. Victor nodded, his breathing heavy. "For now?" Nearby, Amara stood silently, watching as her former comrades disappeared into the night. She turned to Dorian, her voice quiet. "What happens now?" "That depends on you," Dorian replied. "But if you're ready to make amends, there's a place for you here." Amara nodded slowly, the weight of her decision settling over her. The night had ended in chaos, but for the first time in years she felt a glimmer of hope. As the first rays of dawn broke over the abandoned mill, the dust and tension from the confrontation began to settle. The Vietnam Vets MC gathered near the entrance, assessing the aftermath. Victor Hollow, his face bruised but resolute, stood at the center of the group. His steady presence anchored the vets, even as the echoes of the battle lingered in the cool morning air. Keir Lowen lay on the ground, still conscious but clearly defeated. His once defiant smirk was gone, replaced by a look of frustration and disbelief. His gang had abandoned him, retreating into the shadows of Clearwater, their morale shattered. The Iron Fang's reign of terror had finally come to an end. Dorian Highfield stepped forward, her gaze steady as she regarded Keir. Despite her age, she carried herself with the same calm authority that had guided her through the jungles of Vietnam. "It's over, Keir," she said, her voice firm but without malice. "Clearwater isn't yours to take." Keir struggled to sit up, his jaw clenched. "You think this changes anything?" He spat. "You've won a battle, but you haven't won the war." Victor stepped beside Dorian, his arms crossed. "The war's only over when you realize you've already lost," he said flatly. Keir looked away, his bravado crumbling under the weight of his defeat. The silence that followed was heavy, but it was broken by the approach of Amara Nightshade. Amara, who had played a pivotal role in stopping Keir, now stood before him. Her face was set with determination, but there was no trace of triumph in her expression. "You had a chance to lead us, Keir," she said quietly. "Instead, you let your pride and anger destroy everything we built. This is on you." Keir didn't respond, his shoulders sagging as the weight of his choices pressed down on him. Turning away from him, Amara faced Dorian and Victor. "What happens next?" she asked. Dorian exchanged a glance with Victor before replying. "That depends on the town," she said. "But one thing's for certain, the Iron Fangs won't be running it anymore." As the vets secured the mill, ensuring that no remnants of the Iron Fangs lingered, the townspeople of Clearwater began to emerge from their homes. News of the confrontation had spread quickly, and a small crowd gathered at the edge of the site. Astria Windvale was among them, her eyes wide with a mixture of relief and awe. She approached Dorian hesitantly, her voice trembling. "Mrs. Highfield, is it really over?" Dorian placed a reassuring hand on Astria's shoulder. "It's over," she said simply. The crowd began to murmur, their fear giving way to gratitude. One by one, the residents stepped forward, offering words of thanks to the vets. For many, it was the first time they had felt safe in weeks. Victor addressed the crowd, his voice carrying the same calm authority that had guided his team through the night. "Clearwater is your town," he said. "We were just here to remind you of that. Stand together, and no one will ever take it from you again." The words struck a chord, and the crowd responded with a quiet but determined applause. The unity that had been shaken by the Iron Fang's intimidation was beginning to rebuild. Amara watched from the sidelines, her expression thoughtful. She had made her choice, but the path ahead was uncertain. Dorian noticed her hesitation and approached, her voice gentle. "You did the right thing, Amara," she said. Amara looked down, her hands fidgeting. "I'm not sure it matters. I've done things I can't take back." Dorian nodded, her gaze steady. "We all carry our scars, but it's what we do with them that defines us. You have a chance to start over. Don't waste it." Amara met Dorian's eyes, her resolve solidifying. "I won't," she said quietly. The morning stretched on as the vets began to dismantle the remnants of the Iron Fang's influence. Dorian and Victor led the efforts to clean up the damage at the mill and throughout the town. It was hard work, but it was also a symbol of the community's resilience. As the sun climbed higher, the town square became the center of a quiet celebration. Clearwater's residents gathered to express their gratitude, sharing stories of how the vet's presence had given them hope. Among them was Finian Shadowmire, who had been one of the first to call for help when the Iron Fangs began their campaign. He stood with a group of neighbors, his voice filled with emotion. "They didn't just protect us," he said. "They reminded us who we are. Clearwater's a town that takes care of its own, and thanks to them, we're going to keep it that way." The vets didn't stay long after the cleanup was finished. Victor, Malin, Gideon and the rest of the team knew their work in Clearwater was done, but their departure wasn't met with sadness. Instead, it was a moment of pride and gratitude, a testament to the bond they had forged with the town. As they prepared to leave, Dorian stood at the edge of the square, watching the town she had called home for so many years. Victor approached, his expression soft. "You could have called us sooner," he said lightly. Dorian chuckled, her eyes twinkling. "You know me, Victor. I don't call for backup unless I absolutely have to." Victor laughed, shaking his head. "Well, I'm glad you did. Clearwater's lucky to have you." The two exchanged a knowing look, the kind born from shared history and mutual respect. When the motorcycles roared to life and the vets began their journey back, the town stood together, waving them off with gratitude etched into every face. Amara lingered behind, standing beside Dorian. "What about you?" Dorian asked, glancing at her. Amara took a deep breath. "I think I'll stick around for a while. Clearwater feels like a place where I can finally figure things out." Dorian smiled, a genuine warmth in her expression. "You're welcome here. Just remember, every day is a chance to do better." As the sound of the vet's departure faded into the distance, Clearwater began to rebuild. The scars left by the Iron Fangs wouldn't disappear overnight, but the strength of the community, guided by the courage of people like Dorian, ensured that the town's future was bright. As the dust from the Iron Fangs' downfall settled, Clearwater began to heal. The town square, once a place of quiet dread, now buzzed with renewed energy. Families ventured out, shops reopened their doors, and the laughter of children echoed in the streets. The scars left by Keir Lowen's reign of intimidation wouldn't vanish overnight, but the town was determined to reclaim its identity, a place of unity, resilience, and hope. Dorian Highfield stood on her porch, watching as life slowly returned to normal. The morning air carried the scent of blooming flowers from her garden, a stark contrast to the tension that had gripped Clearwater for weeks. She sipped her coffee thoughtfully, reflecting on the events that had unfolded. Her phone buzzed and she reached for it, smiling faintly as she saw Victor Hollow's name. She answered, the familiar timbre of his voice greeting her. "Morning, Dorian. How's the town holding up?" "Better," she replied, her voice warm. "The people are starting to believe in themselves again. And that's thanks to you and the vets." Victor chuckled lightly. "We just reminded them what they were capable of." The real strength was already there. They spoke briefly about Clearwater's recovery before saying their goodbyes, their bond as steadfast as ever. Dorian set the phone down and turned to see Amara Nightshade approaching her front gate. Amara's steps were tentative, her face a mixture of determination and uncertainty. She had stayed behind after the confrontation at the mill, eager to make amends and find a new purpose. "Good morning," Dorian greeted her, gesturing for Amara to join her on the porch. "Morning," Amara said, her voice soft. "I wanted to thank you for giving me a chance." Dorian met her gaze, her expression kind but firm. "You've earned it, but the real work starts now. If you want to rebuild, it's going to take more than words." Amara nodded, her resolve hardening. "I know. I've already started helping Finian with the cleanup around town, and I'm talking to some of the people Keir hurt, trying to make things right." "That's a good start," Dorian said. "Keep at it. Clearwater can be a second chance if you let it." As Amara left, Dorian felt a surge of pride. The young woman's journey wouldn't be easy, but it was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, redemption was possible. The town, too, continued its journey of healing. With the Iron Fangs gone, the residents began to reclaim their streets, their businesses, and their sense of security. Finian Shadowmire emerged as a leader within the community, organizing town meetings and encouraging neighbors to support one another. Astria Windvale, once timid in the face of the Iron Fang's threats, found new confidence. She began planning events to bring the town together, starting with a community barbecue in the park. It was a small gesture, but one that symbolized the town's resilience. For Dorian, life returned to its steady rhythm, though the events of the past weeks lingered in her mind. As she tended to her garden one evening, she noticed a group of children riding their bikes down the street, their laughter ringing out. It was a simple moment, but it brought her a deep sense of satisfaction. Clearwater was safe again, and it was worth every effort to keep it that way. Dorian Highfield's porch had become a familiar gathering place in Clearwater over the past few weeks. The morning sunlight spilled over her tidy yard, highlighting the careful work she had put into her garden, a symbol of patience and perseverance, much like the woman herself. Today, the porch was quieter, the last traces of turmoil fading into the steady rhythm of life. For Dorian, the events of the past few weeks had brought a renewed sense of purpose. She had always valued her role in the community, but stepping forward to protect the town reminded her of the strength she still carried. Though she preferred a life of quiet reflection, she had realized that sometimes leadership wasn't about seeking it. It was about answering the call when no one else could. That same realization had spread throughout Clearwater. In the wake of the Iron Fang's departure, the town was more united than ever. Neighbors who had once kept to themselves now worked together to repair the damage. The diner, its windows replaced and its walls repainted, reopened to a crowd larger than it had seen in years. The gas station, which had been the starting point for so much of the conflict, became a symbol of resilience as Astria Windvale began decorating its interior with photos and mementos from the community. Astria herself had changed the most. Once shy and reserved, she now greeted each customer with a newfound confidence. She had seen firsthand how bravery could come in many forms, and the quiet courage of standing up against fear had become her daily mantra. "I never thought I could do it," she admitted to Dorian one afternoon, her voice tinged with wonder. "But watching you, Victor, and the others, it made me realize I'm stronger than I thought." Dorian smiled, her pride evident. "Courage isn't about not being afraid, Astria. It's about doing what needs to be done despite the fear. And you've proven you can do that." Meanwhile, Amara Nightshade was carving out a new path for herself. The weight of her past choices lingered, but her resolve to make amends drove her forward. She spent her days helping Finian Shadowmire organize town repairs, often taking on the hardest tasks without complaint. Her evenings were spent talking to those she had wronged, offering apologies and asking how she could help. At first, some residents were hesitant to trust her, but her sincerity won them over. Finian, who had initially been wary of her presence, became one of her biggest supporters. "She's not the same person who came into this town with the iron fangs," he told Dorian one day. "She's working harder than anyone to fix what they broke." Dorian nodded, watching Amara from a distance as she painted over graffiti left by the gang. "We all have the capacity to change," she said softly. "It just takes someone willing to guide us." Dorian Highfield sat quietly on her porch swing, the soft creak of the wood mingling with the sound of distant laughter from the town square. She gazed out at the street, her thoughts drifting to the bonds that had been reforged in the heat of conflict. The Vietnam Vets MC had left Clearwater weeks ago, but their presence was still felt, especially in the way Dorian carried herself now, with a renewed sense of connection to a world she had once thought she had left behind. The phone on her side table buzzed, and she reached for it, smiling as she saw Victor Hollow's name on the screen. Their conversations had become a regular occurrence since the Iron Fangs were driven out. For years, Dorian and Victor had kept their connection distant, each respecting the other's need for peace after a lifetime of service. But now, their camaraderie had grown into something more immediate, as though the events in Clearwater had reignited a shared purpose. "Victor," Dorian greeted, her tone warm. "To what do I owe the honor today?" Victor's laugh was deep and genuine. "Just checking in. Figured you might have decided to start a new chapter as Clearwater's sheriff or something." Dorian chuckled. "Hardly, though I wouldn't mind enforcing the speed limit on Main Street. The kids these days think they're invincible on those bikes." The conversation shifted to lighter topics, updates from the vets, Victor's ongoing projects in his own community, and shared memories from their time in Vietnam. But as their laughter faded, Victor's tone grew more thoughtful. "You know, Dorian," he said, "when you called me that night, I wasn't sure if it was the right move. It's easy to think we've aged out of being the kind of people who make a difference." Dorian leaned back, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "I felt the same way. For years I thought I'd done my part, that it was someone else's turn to take the reins. But then I saw what was happening here, and I realized that standing by wasn't an option anymore." Victor sighed, his voice tinged with admiration. "You reminded me of something important, Dorian. The fight doesn't end just because we're not on the front lines anymore. It's not about being young or strong, it's about showing up when it matters." Those words stayed with Dorian long after their call ended. She thought about the ways the Vietnam Vets MC had rallied not just to protect Clearwater, but to teach the town that strength came from unity. They had brought a sense of security back to a community on the brink of despair, but their presence had done something else too. It had reminded Dorian of the value of her own experiences. She no longer saw herself as simply an aging veteran with a storied past. Now, she recognized that her wisdom, her calm in the face of chaos, and her ability to inspire others were just as vital as the physical strength she'd once relied on. The lessons she'd learned weren't hers alone. She had passed them on to Astria, who now faced challenges with determination. She had shared them with Amara, whose journey of redemption was just beginning. And most importantly, she had shared them with the people of Clearwater, who now stood together, stronger than ever before. The streets of Clearwater seemed brighter in the weeks following the Iron Fang's defeat, as though the town itself had taken a deep breath and exhaled the weight of fear. The transformation wasn't just in the physical repairs, the replaced windows, repainted walls, and cleared debris. It was in the spirit of the community. Neighbors who had once kept their doors shut and their heads down now stopped to greet each other in the square. Families gathered in the park for picnics. Children rode their bikes down the streets without looking over their shoulders. Dorian Highfield found herself at the center of this quiet resurgence, though she hadn't sought it out. The townspeople looked to her as a symbol of their resilience, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming adversity, strength and unity could prevail. It was a role she accepted humbly, seeing herself not as a leader, but as one piece of a larger whole. One afternoon, as Dorian tended to her garden, Astria Windvale arrived with a tray of cookies, a gesture of gratitude and friendship that had become common in recent days. "Mrs. Highfield," Astria said, setting the tray on the porch, "I just wanted to thank you again for everything. This town feels alive again because of you." Dorian straightened, brushing dirt from her gloves, and smiled. "It feels alive because of all of you, Astria. I may have given a little nudge, but it's the people of Clearwater who chose to stand up and fight for each other." Astria nodded, her eyes shining with admiration. "Still, you showed us how. I don't think we could have done it without you." The conversation turned to lighter topics, and as Astria left, Dorian watched her walk down the street, waving to neighbors as she went. It was moments like these that reminded Dorian why Clearwater had been worth fighting for. Amara Nightshade, too, had found her place in the town. With the Iron Fangs behind her, she had thrown herself into the work of rebuilding both the town and herself. The graffiti she had painted over was gone, replaced by a mural she had created with the help of local artists. It depicted scenes of Clearwater's resilience, children playing in the park, shopkeepers laughing with customers, and a subtle nod to the Vietnam Vets MC, a single eagle soaring high above it all. Dorian visited the mural one evening, standing quietly as Amara worked on the final touches. "It's beautiful," Dorian said, her voice warm. Amara turned, her brush in hand, and smiled. "Thanks. I wanted to give the town something to look at, something to remind them of what we've been through and where we're going." "You've given them more than that," Dorian replied. "You've given them hope." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Dorian walked back to her house, her steps slow but steady. The past weeks had been challenging, but they had also been transformative. She had seen the best and worst of humanity, and through it all, she had rediscovered her own capacity to inspire change. That night, as she sat on her porch, the stars glittering above, Dorian reflected on the journey Clearwater had taken. The fight against the Iron Fangs had been about more than reclaiming the town. It had been about reclaiming the community's identity. The people of Clearwater had proven that strength didn't come from intimidation or power. It came from standing together, supporting one another, and believing in the possibility of something better. As the town moved forward, Dorian knew her role would shift once more. She wouldn't always be in the spotlight, and she preferred it that way. But she also knew that when the call came, she would answer it, because that was who she was. And as she looked out at the quiet streets of Clearwater, she felt a deep sense of peace. The town had been tested and had emerged stronger, and so had she. As the town of Clearwater found its way back to peace and unity, the story of Dorian Highfield reminds us all that true strength is timeless. It isn't about how loud you roar or how much power you wield. It's about standing tall for what's right, no matter the odds. Dorian's courage, the resolve of the Vietnam Vets MC, and the resilience of Clearwater's community show us the power of unity and hope, even in the face of darkness. Here at Veteran Biker, we believe stories like these can inspire and uplift, reminding us of the extraordinary bravery and humanity that can be found in the most unexpected places. If this story moved you, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Where are you watching from, and what lessons did this story leave with you? Share your reflections in the comments below. We value your voice and your perspective. And if you enjoyed this story, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to Veteran Biker, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss another incredible journey. Thank you for being part of our Veteran Biker family. Until next time, take care and keep believing in the power of compassion and courage.